We're witnessing the brewing of a currency crisis across the globe. While the US dollar, Russia ruble, and Turkish Lira are struggling to keep up their value in international markets, they have another teammate following suit. The land of the rising sun is suffering from the worst currency crisis it's ever dealt with in over 20 years. In October of 2022, the Japanese yen hit its all-time lowest point of 150 to the US dollar. The last time it was this low was in August of 1990. That's more than 32 years ago. Is this another bump in the road for Japan, or could this be the start of its collapse? Let's take a look. Why is this happening? The Japanese yen was surviving at a cool 115 against the dollar by March of 2022. So what could have possibly happened in the span of 8 months to have warranted such a loss in value? It may not surprise you, but war in the modern world can have devastating consequences to not just those involved, but the rest of the world. The Russia-Ukraine war is one of the culprits of the decline in the yen. Ever since the war broke out in February of 2022, the world economy has been having a tough time dealing with it, and Japan is no exception. The war led to a decrease in supply and an increase in energy prices, which marked tough times for Japan and its currency. We all know Japan is really reliant on imports for its energy. About 90% of their energy is all imported. They're practically blowing most of their money on securitizing energy to keep up with their local demand, as well as their manufacturing units. It makes sense why their top imports are crude petroleum and petroleum gas. This is not only a cause of the yen becoming weaker, but also an effect, because Japan buys most of its energy in dollars, so when the yen is weak, they have to pay more for the same amount of fuel on top of the already increased energy price. Japan's top currency diplomat, Kanda Masato, admitted that a weak yen is going to push up import prices of both food and energy. For example, the price of Brent oil increased by 40% in July of 2022 for the dollar. But for the yen, the increase was about 70%. But energy isn't the only thing that's causing the yen to fall. Another huge reason is interest rates. Other reasons why yen is free falling. There's a huge gap between the interest rates of Japan and the US. Not the one to follow the crowd, Japan likes to keep its interest rates very low compared to their Western counterparts. And investors don't care about low interest rates. They want the good stuff. If they think they can't get some real mileage with the yen, they're gonna go for something else, like the dollar. Can you blame them though? The US Federal Reserve increased its key interest rate from 0.25% to 3.25% since the start of 2022 to combat the increasing cost of living, and it might end up rising to 4.5% by the end of 2023. So why does Japan insist on having such a low interest rate? Mr. Haruhiko Kuroda, the governor of the Bank of Japan, made his reasoning clear. He said that Japan wants the good kind of inflation, the kind that's driven by lively consumer demand. But unfortunately, it got the bad kind, caused by the pandemic, Russia's war in Ukraine, and a strong dollar. The Bank of Japan generally agrees that an increase in rates would cause more trouble than it's worth, because the inflation issue is coming more from the strong dollar and supply problems rather than factors under Japan's control. As a result, Kuroda thinks the bank should maintain these ultra-low interest rates. The completely different approaches of the US and Japan are one of the main causes of the yen's depreciation, but there's still more to consider too. For example, COVID-19 caused Japan's tourism industry to hit an all-time low. Nobody was going anywhere for more than a year since COVID hit, especially not Japan. Their tourism went down to essentially zero, but Japan's determined to boost its economy using tourism and isn't giving up. And let's not forget the global supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic either. You can bet that Japan's exquisite automobile industry was also a victim of this. Plus, the country's classic issue with the grey population is on the verge of getting worse. Japan's aging population has also been a burden on its economy, resulting in a decline in labour force and an increase in domestic demand. And when you couple that with stagnant wages, the picture isn't looking so good for Nippon. Factor in the huge public debt Japan has, roughly 263% of the size of its economy, and it's no wonder inflation reached an all-time high of 4.25%. How bad is it? Let's be real. A weak yen means a couple of bad news for Japan. They gotta pay more for the same stuff, not just for energy, but for food and commodity imports too. This isn't just a strain on the government, but on the average Japanese household too. The cost of products is growing while salaries aren't. The country has seen very small wage hikes in the past decade. From 2014 to 2022, wages have only increased by 2% every year for roughly 300 large companies. This was all thanks to the yearly negotiations done by Japan's trade union confederation, known as Rengo. But don't think Rengo hasn't been trying hard to change this trend. They've been asking for increases of up to 4% for the past 7 years, but companies haven't been budging. So it's safe to say that the purchasing power of the yen has decreased with no real increase in wages to compensate for it. What does that result in? Inconveniences and a worse quality of life for the average Japanese citizen. The yen isn't able to buy as much stuff as it used to. You could buy hundreds of dollars worth of stuff with 10,000 yen back in 2013. But now 10,000 yen is only worth $74 as of May 2023. This also means that Japanese salaries are worse when you compare them to the American dollar. Earning in yen just seems like a rip-off when you could earn in dollars. So what do? Abandon ship and get a job outside of Japan. Japanese citizens are incentivized to leave the country and seek employment elsewhere in the world. Japan's already dealing with a shrinking labor force. If people start leaving on top of that, it's not gonna look good for them. Overall, Japan needs to bring its A game when it comes to dealing with this economic collapse. So is there light at the end of this tunnel, or is it all doom and gloom? A ray of hope. For the first time in 24 years, the Kishida administration intervened by buying yen in October 2022, and it cost them 6.34 trillion yen to do this. Talk about an expensive intervention. And while it worked well, it was only temporary. The Bank of Japan has had a rough history with defending the yen, so they'd rather not go out of their way to make any moves. Even so, the government needs to keep promoting economic activity to recover from this mess. They've passed a bunch of economic policies to help with the situation. We're talking structural reforms, monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, asset purchases, and even negative interest rates. Luckily for Japan though, the wind is finally blowing in its favor. The price of volatile fresh food increased to a crazy high of 3.7% in November 2022. But fortunately, Japan's Research Institute's chief economist, Hideki Matsumura, thinks that the price is going to drop quite quickly soon. This is good news for Japan when you consider the fact that most of its inflation is caused by the import prices of fuel and food. On top of that, the government's been providing subsidies to deal with the rise in electricity and gas bills. The Bank of Japan also reported in one of its quarterly reports that the inflation rate for 2023 will only be 1.6%. Compare that to the 4.25% back in 2022, and it looks like a massive improvement. We might even get to see some real wage increases too. After all, an increase in price demands an increase in salaries. Rengo's managed to set a pay hike target of 5%, but economists aren't buying it. Japan's chief economist at UBS Sumi Trust Wealth Management, known as Daiju Aoki, said that a pay hike over 3% ain't happening, and that it'll be more likely to be 2.5 to 3%. But even 3% is a win in Rengo's books, as it'll be the highest hike in years. With all this in mind, could Japan be on its way to recovering from its worst currency crisis in over 20 years? Or is the land of the rising sun in for a long night? Let us know what you think below, and we'll see you in the next video.